Hey guys, Marcus Melnick here with Firearm Mentor. Hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These little things are free to you and really help the channel. I appreciate your support. Enjoy. Thank you. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Welcome to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor and Stress to Logic, your host. And what you might not know is way back early on in my career, before I worked in law enforcement, I worked in several safety roles. One of those roles was at a junior high in a multiple needs classroom where I managed the acting out behaviors of junior high age kids who had diagnoses such as autism spectrum disorder, Fragile X syndrome. At the time, the word, and it might not be politically correct today, but it was called MMI, mild mental impairment. And a lot of these students had multiple diagnoses, and that was my classroom. A lot of these students were also a product of what used to be called the frustration aggression theory, which was created in 1949 out of Harvard University by a researcher named Dollard. If somebody reaches a certain point of frustration, then they become aggressive, and the bar was relatively low. So there would be a student working on a math problem, and all of a sudden he's throwing his laptop across the room, he's acting out, he's punching, he's kicking, he's biting, he's screaming, and that's when I came in as part of a multidisciplinary team to manage those acting out behaviors. This morning I have on the show Kate Lakowski. She is the proprietor, the owner of Education Empowerment Partners. And I met Kate through the Northbrook Chamber of Commerce. Kate, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's start with the basics. Tell everyone about yourself. What is your personal origin story, and how did you get to where you are today?
I actually grew up in St. Louis, and I remember there were a couple of things that really were the catalyst to becoming a school psychologist and now having a practice where I focus on special education advocacy for parents. When I was growing up, I remember I was very young, probably in the third or fourth grade, and I had a really close friend who had a really hard time socially, and she was getting bullied a lot. And I remember her sharing with me that she felt that the teachers and her parents made her feel that it was her fault for what was going on and the challenges that she was having with her peers. And it really planted a seed in me where I thought, if I were in that position as a school counselor, someone who was providing support at the school, I would want to make sure that that person never felt that it was their fault or that something was wrong with them. And I remember being in school a couple of years later, so I'm still probably fifth or sixth grade, and I was in a classroom with a boy in my class who was always having a lot of big behavioral outbursts, crying. He would be hitting himself. And I remember this one instance where he was having a meltdown in the doorway, crying. And I was thinking to myself, why isn't anyone doing anything to help? And it made me really sad as a kid, thinking about the fact that this was happening in front of us. And okay, now there's another opportunity where he could get made fun of, and no one was really shielding him or protecting his dignity from his peers. And, now I realize that this classmate of mine was most likely on the autism spectrum. And it was these incidents that planted that seed. And I knew I always wanted to work with kids and to be able to have an impact to help kids who had challenges at school. And I went on to go to undergrad at Butler University, and I majored in psychology. And it was there that I heard about school psychology, and I felt like it was a perfect fit for me. I would be able to work with a lot of different types of kids in that setting, working with different educators, and have a big impact on children.
Can you talk about your volunteer work with Big Brothers and Big Sisters?
For me, it kind of stems from this belief that I feel like everyone needs to have one person in their life that believes in them and that they can talk to. So I've looked for opportunities where I can help to be that person. And it's something that I've told my students over the years, that if you have just one good friend, then consider yourself lucky having someone to confide in and somebody who believes in you. So that was really the impetus for volunteering with that organization for me.
That's great. It's always better to have 4 quarters than 100 pennies.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I grew up with that same attitude. You worked as a school psychologist for 16 years at New Trier, and you can't get any better than New Trier. And I'm a Stevenson parent, so if I'm saying that, I mean, they're both very, very good schools. Can you talk about your experience at New Trier?
I used to tell new psychologists that came in that we were a volume business because we were very busy. And I think over the years, I was seeing kids coming in and looking just sicker and sicker over the years, and they were coming to us that way. So we were having students that by 9th grade had already had multiple hospitalizations and inpatient treatments at various hospitals and programs. And this wasn't unique to New Trier. I was meeting other school psychologists in the area, talking to school psychologists around the country, and this was not special to where we were. There were a lot of schools all over that were seeing this rise in significant mental health needs. I think that was the part that really sticks out to me, is that subgroup of kids with disabilities who were having such significant needs was growing at a really high rate. One of the things that we were also dealing with at New Trier and across the country too was seeing this significant rise in school refusal and figuring out how we were going to respond to that and how we could support students and really get to the root of that issue and figure out how to bridge that gap so that they could re-engage in school.
You said something that you touched on, something I want to do a little bit more of a follow-up on. You said that you saw students who looked sicker and sicker, and they didn't really look sick visually. Is that correct? Sometimes you can't see the disability. That's what I'm getting at, is sometimes regular people look fine and they're not fine. That's what I'm getting at.
I think we were seeing both. I think sometimes you could visibly see students were not taking care of their hygiene. That was something that you could visibly see, and that would be an indicator that obviously there was perhaps some significant depression, anxiety going on. But I think not dissimilar to other schools, and you're in a high-performing, high-pressure school district, there were certainly a lot of students where, as you're talking about, Marcus, that were perhaps masking a lot of the things that were going on inside of them and still doing well in school, still getting good grades, and maybe self-harming or doing things outside that we were not aware of. And then we would hear there was a significant event, and that was leading to a hospitalization, for example. So I think it was really both. The kids that externalize the behavior, they're certainly easier to see and respond to with interventions. But a lot of times, these students who are very high performing, it's not always easy to know what's going on behind the scenes until sometimes it's a little bit too late, where that mental health issue has now become so significant.
Very, very interesting. And I appreciate your expertise. I would not have used the word masking, but that's why you're the professional in that area and I'm not. Let's fast forward a little bit to today. Can you talk about Education Empowerment Partners, what specifically you do, and how you advocate for special needs students and their families?
What I do is I work with families who have students with disabilities to really identify what services and supports they need that they may or may not be receiving. So we come up with an action plan to secure those appropriate services for their students. So this could be in the form of an initial IEP if they don't have services, or it could be a change in placement, maybe moving to a therapeutic school if their needs are really significant and maybe they need more support than what the public school can provide. So I work with them to really educate them on their rights and educate them on their options.
I want to kind of connect the dots a little bit for the listeners. We said that you worked at New Trier, which is in Winnetka. It's on the North Shore. It's a very, very affluent area. It's actually the most affluent area in the state of Illinois. And it just goes to show that just because somebody is wealthy or well off, that doesn't mean they might be okay. This transcends different sociological groups, different income levels. It's all over the board. And I just want the people to know, hey, if you win the lottery, that might create some problems. Everyone wants to win the lottery. But at the same time, you have assistance in the schools. How do you address teachers who have a mixed class of some special ed, some regular ed students, yet the students that they have that have IEPs or other plans aren't getting the services that they need? Whether it's due to staffing, whether it's due to case overload, how do teachers manage that?
I think it can be really challenging because there's, as you said, there's often a lot of students that have a diverse set of needs in one classroom. And I think trying as best as they can to create a good classroom management plan is probably the first step in helping not only those students that have disabilities and IEP or 504 plans, but all of the students to create predictable routines and structure and expectations for behavior. And I think that is a great foundation to supporting all students who have increased levels of needs. Well, I think the other big support that school psychologists or advocates and consultants can provide teachers is really just brainstorming on other ways to support students. You know, sometimes it's helpful just to have another set of eyes and ears on your classroom. So something that I do is I can go in, do observations, and then work with teachers to come up with some different strategies to helping those kids engage and learn in the classroom.
When you talk about a classroom behavior management plan, I'll tell you what comes to mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And I've seen different systems like this. One of them was called the popcorn system. One of them is like red, yellow, and green. Everyone starts at green. Oh, you're talking out of turn, you're going to go to yellow, and then red is this is more of a negative, but red is, I have to call your parents. Yellow is, you're on thin ice. But there's also positive reward systems where there's, like, for example, my wife has one of those wheels you spin, and then you pick a prize out of her little basket, and I provide stuff, and we'll go to garage sales and buy stuff that's new, not used, not crap, but new stuff. Can you talk about a positive reward system and how a classroom should be set up with one?
Well, I think your wife has the right idea because kids respond to positive reinforcement. And I think telling them what they should do and what that looks like is much more effective than telling them what they should not do. So I was recently speaking to a group of parents about the importance of behavior plans, and most importantly, the part that comes before the plan, which in schools is called an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment.
Okay.
And I think the key, whether it's in a classroom or if you're working with an individual student, is always working to identify the why behind behavior. Because behavior is a communication tool. It's a tool that students use when they don't have the words or they don't know what to do instead of the behavior. So understanding what drives the behavior is so critical in determining what good teaching is going to look like and what interventions teachers and educators can use to teach those students based on those needs.
Can you talk about your blog? What are some current events? What do you write about?
The purpose of my blog is helping parents get education on school law, procedure, how to feel prepared at their IEP or 504 meetings. It's really just about helping parents feel like they're on a little bit more of an even playing field when they show up to those meetings for their students. Because I know firsthand that there's a lot of information that is shared. Schools, myself included as a school psychologist, we use a lot of acronyms, and it can be very overwhelming for parents. So in my blog, I give a lot of tips and strategies for parents and helping them to break down some of those barriers and help them to feel more prepared when they're at those meetings and help them feel that they can better advocate for their children.
As a school psychologist, are you also a certified teacher?
No, I am not.
With the variety in education systems and states, are you able to help people anywhere, or is your work restricted to Illinois or even the Chicago area? I just don't know how the licensure works.
I can really help parents anywhere, particularly with IEPs. These are federal laws, so I can certainly provide advice to parents who are navigating that special education system no matter where they are.
And there's a lot of talk in education about the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, going away. Have you seen any fallout from the real fallout, not people nervous about them, they're a specialist, but has there been any fallout from that whole can of worms, so to speak?
I have not seen anything yet. I think we're very lucky to be in Illinois. And I think right now I'm seeing schools still responding to students' needs, particularly on the mental health side, and trying to put resources in that area. I think parents are certainly, there's a heightened awareness right now to disability education and support. But I think we're lucky. We're in a good state, and there's a lot of services and supports that are available to students here.
I'm going to give an opinion. I think that if federal funding gets stopped in any ways that help Illinois residents, I have a feeling the Illinois legislature will step up to the plate and fill that gap. That's just a gut feeling based upon the politics of the state, and I don't do this politician's great, this politician stinks. I don't do that. I talk about realities. I want my listeners to know that this is my dream, teaching people about safety. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my listeners, I couldn't live my dream. So on behalf of my family and myself, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to live my dream. And I also want to continue to live my dream, and I'm excited to continue to spread the word of safety. Recently, I began a new service as a conference keynote speaker. So if anyone would like for me to speak at future events, or if anyone knows of an introduction or would like to discuss how we can work with one another, I'd love to do just that. The keynote speaking website is www.stress2logic.com. That is STRESS2logic.com. If you're aware of any conference speaking engagements where you'd like to have me speak, I'd love an introduction. You can always share my electronic business card, which is Marcus Melnick, MarcusMelnick.com. Now, back to the show. You mentioned an IEP plan, individual educational plan. Can you explain the difference between an IEP, a 504, a behavior management program, or any other little plans that can help students who have special needs?
The biggest difference between an IEP, which is an individualized education program, and a 504 is that with an IEP, you're talking about specialized instruction from a special education teacher. or related service provider, such as a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist. An IEP is going to give your student with a disability individualized goals that are then connected to specialized instruction to help them meet those goals. A 504 is providing your student with equal access to learning, which is typically in the form of classroom or testing accommodations to help them reach grade level standards.
Okay, and what about behavior management plans?
Behavior management plans are also really important for students with disabilities, where you're seeing behaviors that are frequently occurring across the school setting. That's really going to be important. And again, identifying the why behind that behavior and coming up with good proactive teaching strategies to help them come up with good, safe replacement behaviors so that they can engage in the classroom in a more pro-social way.
Past 5 years in our society has been pretty tumultuous. We had civil unrest, riots, the pandemic. Really, this is an opinion, and I'm not a psychology professional, but really impacted people's levels of anxiety. Has the recent rise in this social anxiety affected the volume of students who now need these services? And how's everyone keeping up with that?
I would say absolutely it has. I think across the country, we've been seeing this rise in mental health needs for students with anxiety and depression. And as I mentioned before, I think schools are trying to keep up with resources to address these mental health needs, but it can be really hard because there's just more and more students that need the support, and getting those people in the school is not always easy. I think the other thing, there's been a lot of movement that's been sparked by Jonathan Haidt's book, An Anxious Generation. This whole concept of overparenting in the real world and underparenting in the virtual world. And I think there's been a lot of conversations I know happening in our community and across the country where schools are now removing phones from the schools, where kids might have to put them in a pouch or something so they're not engaged with those during the school day. Parents are also becoming aware of how social media and smartphones plays a role in mental health. And so there's this whole pledge to wait until the end of 8th grade before giving your child a smartphone, trying to get your students to not engage with social media before they're 16, which is very, very difficult. So I think there's a lot of conversations right now that are happening with mental health, and the schools are partnering with organizations in the community so that parents feel they have strong partners in order to really move the needle and make a change.
When my kids were old enough where everyone's getting a cell phone, and that's, by the way, 4th and 5th grade, or at least when my kids were younger, I lost this argument, but I made the announcement that you can have a cell phone at the same age I was when I had my first cell phone. And they get all excited. How old were you, Dad? 23. Well, that's because they didn't exist when I was a kid. Or at least affordable didn't exist. So thank you for laughing. That was intended. It was a true story, but it was also intended to be funny. What final thoughts, Kate, can you offer about what you do? And look, I'm not in your space, so there's a topic or a question that I should have asked that I didn't. The floor is yours.
I think one thing I try to say to parents is that if you have a gut feeling that something needs to change with your child and their education, reach out early, because sometimes I think it's hard for parents to know who to reach out to for support or when. And when they reach out to me and things are so far gone in that there's really no trust between the school system and that parent anymore, I wish that they would have come to me a little bit sooner so that I can help in working with them to preserve that relationship to the extent possible. And I think one thing that I really try to stress is that advocacy doesn't necessarily have to equate to contentious, litigious situations. Sometimes it's just really nice to have an extra set of eyes and ears when it comes to education or, understanding what your rights are, understanding what options are even available to students and to you as parents. So I think if you have a gut feeling that something isn't working, reach out. And I think it's important that parents feel that they have a partner when they're navigating services for their kids, because this stuff is not easy. It's really hard and it's emotional, and you need to feel like you have a partner. And if it's not the school, we can work to re-engage and try to put that relationship back together so you feel like you have a partnership in the school. Or maybe it's finding a Facebook group for parents that have kids with similar needs, or a community group, just something so that you don't feel that you're alone.
Jack Black would have said on your latest comments, "Nailed it." And one of the things that I want to point out, I'm not an expert in psychology, but I'm a up and coming expert in the human stress response. And when we are stressed, we don't think straight, which is why it's very important to have someone like Kate Lakowski be an advocate, because we love our children very, very much. We want the best for our children. And sometimes we get in an emotional mindset and we need an advocate. And that's where Kate fills that gap. Kate, can you share your contact information, your location, website, social media, and how people can get a hold of you for their requirements or for their needs?
Yes, if you'd like more information, you can go to my website, which is educationempowermentpartners.com. As you said, I have a blog, and there's some great topics on there, such as the 504 accommodations, how to prepare for IEP meetings, things of that nature. You can sign up for my newsletter, and always feel free to reach out, even if you'd like to just have a consultation.
Thank you very much for appearing on the show. We greatly appreciate you educating our listeners and sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.